All right, welcome to the Lefty G Show, folks. I really appreciate everybody being back here. Happy Tuesday. I'm going to put my ears on so I know what the hell I'm doing. And but I want to thanks everybody for being with me again for another night. And tonight we got another thick show ahead of us. I know that last night I kind of went a little long on that topic. I hope everyone was able to follow along with how we can prevent the election from being stolen. I think Trump's done a great job as far as keeping it too big to steal. But tonight I want to really talk about why Democrats suck at foreign policy. I think you guys may have heard recently in the news up to about 12 hours ago that there's a small town in Indiana where residents are now complaining that their kids are falling behind in school after an influx of more migrants. We know that this is part of the Democrats' continued for years and years and years, I mean decades, failed foreign policy approaches. And they really do. They just absolutely suck at it. And, thousands of migrants from Haiti and dozens of other countries have arrived in this isolated Indiana town of about 18,000 in just recently. As a matter of fact, more were dropped off, I want to say yesterday. And there's already all the stuff happening. Kids are being, pulled out of their own elementary school. American kids are being pulled out of their own elementary schools in face of all these Haitians. And I'm sure the cat population is going to go down quite a bit. And, probably the Canadian geese are all going to get fucking eaten. And, these pieces of shit are going to be taking over a small Indiana town, the heartland of America. And this is what these dummy craps want to do. It was Obama that said years and years ago that he wanted to change the demographics of America forever. That was what he actually openly said. And we're going to be talking about that on another show because I really want to really look at the sincerity, the seriousness, I should say, of what that really is. We're in trouble here. We're allowing these pukes to come into our country, and of course, and what I'm hearing, I don't have this verified as of yet, but on a solid source. But I'm also hearing that there's assaults and everything that's already happening to American people, specifically young women. So this is something that we're definitely going to be talking about. But yeah, the topic of the show tonight is why Democrats suck at foreign policy. So we'll see you on the other side. We're going to get into it.
This is America First Radio. Patriots, get your ears on because we're blowing the speakers out.
Lefty G. It is time for the Lefty G Show. The only show to get you right. Get ready to get right with Lefty. Your voice taking you down Freedom Road. Now, here's your host, Lefty G.
Let's hit the fucking road!
All right, gang, welcome back. Again, for anyone just joining us, it's Tuesday, and I know that coming off of yesterday's show, this is going to be another thick topic. But yeah, we're here to talk about why Democrats suck at foreign policy and have traditionally always sucked at foreign policy. It's funny. America had once, at one time in this country, and I'll even go back and say probably they had a once-in-a-century chance to create a stable peace after the end of the Cold War. But we didn't take into account the fact that Democrats historically suck at foreign policy, and we let these pukes, take office. And again, I'll say this right now because I want to be very clear about what I'm going to say here, and I'm kind of winging it, but everything here is going to be accurate, so pay attention. Historically, Democrats have had a notoriously poor foreign policy strategy and effort base, all around. I mean, it's almost like they have no fucking clue what they're doing, especially in foreign policy. The Democratic leaders responsible for squandering America's hard-fought Cold War victory and creating the conditions for today's increasingly dangerous confrontations with Russia and China and Iran have zero idea how foolish they really have been. They are so far in last place that these idiots think they're first. Just absolute blundering fucking idiots. And, the blunders, I'm going to take you guys back here a little bit because I really want to stick to that point as far as blundering to give you an idea of how long. Now, I'm not going to go all the way back to shitheads like, Jimmy Carter and all that kind of crap. I'm not going to go back. I'm going to go a few years back. And I think a good crop of the listeners here probably remember this, and the other crop are going to learn something. But the blundering, I should say, began under former President Bill Clinton and have really continued, I'd have to say unabated, through the Biden-Harris presidency to this very day. And remember, Camel Toe Harris wants to be in the White House as president. And we just can't let that happen, folks. Elections have consequences. Elections matter. So first, let's get into the point here, why Democrats have historically sucked at foreign policy. First, for those of you who didn't live through it, here's a quick primer on the end of the Cold War. So it began 9 months after President Ronald Reagan, best president in my opinion, in my lifetime at the very least, but it began 9 months after President Ronald Reagan left office when the Berlin Wall was smashed by freedom-loving citizens, German citizens, while all their communist East German soldiers watched helplessly. And a week and a half later, that's when the Velvet Revolution of 1989 began, and in Czechoslovakia specifically, and spread rapidly across the Russian-dominated Eastern Europe. And as a side note, my girlfriend, who's Lithuanian, her and her family, they have a lot of memory as far as what it was like to live under the Iron Curtain. And some of the stories we hear from them is quite an eye-opener. And I've only heard small snippets of the story, mainly through her. But you can imagine, we don't want that shit here, and that's what the Squad, all these AOCs, and Harris, and all these fucking whack job liberals. That's what they want to bring here. So back to freedom-loving passion. So these people, they obviously, we saw people that were breaking out of the mold, during the Czechoslovakian 1989 Velvet Revolution. And it spread very, very, very rapidly across Russian-dominated Eastern Europe. And this whole idea of freedom, this whole idea of prosperity, it extended into China. And you guys probably remember this. These popular protests by freedom-loving Chinese erupted in the spring of 1989 and climaxed all the way through in China at the Tiananmen Square in Beijing that June, I believe it was, where thousands of protesters, mainly students, gathered near the tomb of the Chinese Communist revolutionary leader Mao Zedong to demand the democratic reforms. They wanted freedom. What a great concept. And as a side note, everybody talks about, don't get me wrong, Hitler was a horrible man, 9 million dead, but no one ever really likes to bring up Mao Zedong, who killed like 80 million fucking people. Communism has killed more fucking people than I would have to say, outside of Islam, any other fucking group of people. But at any rate, I digress. So yeah, Mao Zedong, they gathered at the tomb of the cocksucker who killed 80 million people. And what did China do? They responded accordingly. By literally crushing the protests with tanks and troops, massacring hundreds, if not thousands, of people. And the dissolution, I'll call it, of the Soviet Union followed in 1991 as the former Soviet republics like Ukraine and Kazakhstan, they chose independence over serfdom to Moscow. And it was a beautiful time. But what did this do? This left China isolated as one of the last bastions of Marxism, where, we had a clear vision of what Ronald Reagan helped usher in by breaking the backs of the communist world. And the following year, Slick Willie Clinton won the presidential election. So now we're coming out of 1991, we're getting into 1992, and here ushers in Slick Willie with a pocket full of cigars and a bewildered intern. But we'll get to that story later. So Clinton inherited America's Cold War victory and its, peace dividends, I should say. And it was really a respite from high levels of defense spending, during literally the 44 or 45 years of confrontation with the Soviet Union. But he inherited none of the wisdom of the statesmen who preceded him on how to deal with Marxist regimes. 2 months after taking office, Clinton granted Most Favored Nation, or what they call the MFN initiative, Most Favored Nation, trade status to communist China, stating that he hoped, again, hope, and you've heard the old plan, hope's not a fucking plan, but Slick Willie had hoped democratic reforms would flow from U.S.-China trade policies. And Nancy Pelosi, remember that old crooked witch, who rounded up congressional support for the move, stood by his side. So here comes the Democrats ready to fuck up everything that the Republicans had put into place. And Clinton's liberalization of trade with China ushered in the destruction of millions of American manufacturing jobs and hollowed out our industry base completely. Look at us now. Look at the Rust Belt in Ohio, gone. And as manufacturing jobs shifted to China, Beijing's treasury really got fattened. And revenues from this foreign exports, and these monies funded China's military rise. Look at these. Look at the dinks now. So former President Barack Obama's foreign policy missteps are really so numerous that I want to address on this first. We've gotten a little bit of a history lesson here, and I'm going to keep touching back and forth on that. But let's jump now from Slick Willie to Barack Obama and his foreign policy missteps. That they really are so numerous. I'm only going to hit on highlights at this point. I'm going to get into one in particular here in a minute in the show, but I want to save it because it's going to make sense of how we have this destructive path in the Middle East right now, and you can trace it all the way back to the fucking Democrats. But I digress. Former President Barack Obama's foreign policy missteps are so numerous, as I said. I'm only going to touch on some of the high-level ones at this point before I get into the meat and potatoes of it. And these, as I said, directly led us into the Middle East situation we're currently in today. But as an appetizer of his idiocy, he let Russian President Vladimir Putin seize Crimea without any serious consequences, thereby fueling Putin's appetite for conquering where? Ukraine. He failed to back Iran's Green Movement in 2009 when pro-democracy protests broke out nationwide. Instead, he strengthened the Ayatollahs by negotiating a nuclear deal that gave Iran billions of dollars in sanctions and relief while doing nothing to prevent Iran from eventually developing nuclear weapons. He, in many ways, aided the rise of the Islamic State, and ironically, while at the same time dismissing the terrorist organization as a junior varsity. Then there's Afghanistan, where Obama declared a war of necessity shortly after taking office. He called it a war that we had to win. He surged American troops into the country under a muddled policy that announced a date of their fucking pullout. And when when their mission to transform the country had barely begun, I mean, they were barely had boots on the ground. And Obama's already giving a clear indication, telegraphing to the enemy when we're going to be leaving. And predictably, the Taliban hunkered down and waited for this eventual departure of U.S. troops. So Obama's war of necessity came to a, I guess best way to call it is a shameful end when President Joe Biden summarily pulled out U.S. troops in a very fucking humiliating withdrawal that left billions of dollars of military equipment in the hands of who? The fucking Taliban. Which in turn further, I would have to say emboldened, is that a good word to use? Emboldened hostile leaders like Russia's Putin and China's Jinping, whatever the fuck this guy's name is. It emboldened these guys. And they really started to feel their oats. And on Biden's watch, the foreign policy blunders of his predecessors were compounded only by his own. And then don't get me wrong here, dementia aside, of course, he fucked up while he was still fairly lucid. So this leads us to today in the Middle East. So let me reiterate that the strategy, I guess, the Iran strategy of the Democrats was, how do I want to put this, that I can put this simply? The Iranian strategy was that under the Obama-Biden administration, they came up with what they called creative tension. And that meant that they were going to empower the Iran deal, lift the oil sanctions, and stop the terrorist designation on the Houthis. They were going to increase money to the Palestinians, even Hamas, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these things that maybe are a little bit more prevalent in everyone's memories. And an empowered Iran now would be played off against Israel and the Gulf Arab, / Sunnis monarchies. And the United States would adjudicate that tension, again, under Biden. And I would really say Obama still pulling the puppet strings. I don't think that asshole ever left Washington. Being slightly in favor of, revolutionary, / underclass regimes, I think Obama thought if, just as he, sided with community organizing activities, in the United States, specifically here in Chicago, with the with this community organizing activities that he had done here in the United States. So he saw the Shia and the Palestinians as the underdogs. Again, very terrible fucking group of people. But Obama had seen the Shia and the Palestinians as underdogs. Well, Donald Trump came in and blew all that up. Undid all of that stuff, and rightfully so. And everybody said that there was going to be a war. They said that the Houthis were terrorists, and there was, that they're, not going to get any more money in the financial systems, and they were going to be all upset and up in arms, and, they tried to degrade, Trump on his policies, and we're not going to give a care because he's going to get us into World War III. And in fact, Donald Trump was doing just the opposite. He was pulling us out of the issues that we're currently facing right now. And, we're not going to give a dime to Hamas or the PLA because it's fungible. And this was Donald Trump's idea, and that they used that money, obviously, for weaponry. This was his retort to all of this. They use it for weaponry. They use it for tunneling. Look at all the tunnels that the Israelis have uncovered. And he had mentioned that we're not going to go back to that crazy Iran deal, and that we're going to sanction the Iranians, and we're going to cut off the $100 billion. And then he said, you know what? Anytime that there's a space or a weakness between Israel and the United States, someone, comes in and says, hey, one of these bad guys comes in and says, hey, we're going to destroy the Jewish state. And the thing is, under Trump's watch, look at all the positive things that happened in the Middle East, the Golan Heights. He made sure that it was going to remain in Israeli territory for good. He moved the embassy, etc. And Trump did all of that. Then, of course, in typical fashion of, Fucking up foreign policy, the demented Democrat himself, Biden, came in, and in this, I think his name was Anthony Blinken, or I believe his name was. Forgive me if I got that wrong, but I don't really care enough to remember it. I guess specifically the details are there, but his name I can't remember. But this guy Anthony Blinken, I believe his name is. This guy came in and said, it was the calmest period in 20 years, which is very, very true. So whatever Trump did, it worked. And that's really the moral of the story here. It worked. A Republican came in, and we had, peace for the first time in 20 years in the Middle East. And then they, meaning, Biden, Obama, Harris, they repealed literally every single step that Trump had put into place. They gave $6 billion for hostages. They gave them $100 billion for oil revenues. Then they said that the Houthis were not terrorists and that Hamas needs money. Again, all this idea of appeasement. And you remember Ronald Reagan famously said he's not going to negotiate with terrorists. Well, Biden pretty much gave them all a blowjob. And that's how we got into this present situation that we're currently in the Middle East with Israel. In other words, anytime Israeli enemies feel that Israel is strained or to the extent it cannot reply to their aggression aggressively in turn, those Israelis are in big trouble. They always get attacked. And there will be a I guess the best way to put it, we have this tension, and now we have this war, like exactly what's going on now. And you can follow the bouncing ball back to everything that I'm saying. And anytime the United States says, we're going to protect the only democracy in the Middle East, and we have a special relationship with the Jewish state, because, quite frankly, the Jewish state is entitled. I'm going to say this again. The Jewish state is entitled to its historic homeland from the biblical area, period. And, when the United States says stuff like, we're not going to tell, Israel what it must do or cannot do, that they're going to protect themselves in the ways and means that they feel best, and we're going to help them with the struggle because it is in the best interest of Western civilization. And think about that. It's in the best interest of Western civilization, not just America, but that's what it is, Western civilization. And so anytime this happens, Israel is literally safe. Now, and I mean right now, it is in a terrible place and position because the world has told all of us and Israel that it cannot deal with Hezbollah. We have this whole idea of, fear mongering and appeasement by the left. They say things about Hezbollah like, they have 150,000 rockets, or they'll say that the Houthis are, too far away, they can't really be dealt with, and, it's going to be too much of an expenditure. And they talk about that the Saudis had committed war crimes against them, and that we sided with them at one point. And that, Iran will have, quote unquote, the bomb. And, you'll have to fly over Jordan and Saudi, and it's just too hard to do, and we can't get into this. And all this rhetoric, all of this rhetoric about literally shit that they caused, that Trump came in and undid. And by the way, you want to be proportional. Even after all of the attacks coming from every side to Israel, we got to understand something here, that Israel is the last bastion, maybe besides Jordan, who's a very distant second, I would say, in the Middle East. But Israel is our number one ally in the Middle East. And Israel is entirely dependent on technology and resupply from the United States, mostly, and other countries like United Kingdom and other countries like that on a much lesser scale, but the United States predominantly. But for them to stage a full-scale reprisal, they'll literally run out of munitions unless we supply them. And that's the position that we need to take, and not the back and forth, crooked stuff that I spoke about in previous shows, where we're going to put all this, we're going to let North Carolina's hurricane victims, suffer while we give all this money, $375 million or $1 billion over to Lebanon and all this kind of stuff, but at the same time, put in a bunch of money for missiles and rockets and things like that for Israel. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about the warmongering practices, which is another point that we won't deep dive too much into as far as, but it's another example of why the Democrats suck at foreign policy. But I think the thing I wanted to point out here is we got to be very realistic that the Axis powers of today are Russia, China, and Iran, and I would even have to say North Korea. They're kind of popping their heads up, and let's not forget, the first and only American to ever successfully cross 38th parallel in Korea was Donald Trump, and he did it without a gun, and he did it, if you remember, with his hand on the shoulder of the North Korean dictator. I can't think of that pudgy little bastard's name right now because it doesn't fucking matter. But the fact of the matter is that, look at the successes that he had, the 4 years of peace versus the warmongering and the foreign policy fuck-ups that, again, like history has already taught us, that the Democrats have brought in. But my point here is the Axis powers of today are Russia, China, Iran, and I guess I'll say North Korea. And the four of them absolutely do pose an existential threat, not only to America, but to democracies worldwide. The U.S. and the West now face the gravest threats to the post-war world, I'd have to say order, really since maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we have to be very aware of how this affects. Now, this is something that we have to understand. And if you look at what's happening now in this small little town in Indiana where, we're having, Haitians dropped off, in the middle of the small town America, and they're taking over schools, and Americans are being negatively impacted, if not directly assaulted by them, and like I said, the fucking cat population is going to go down in that town. But look at the Venezuelan gangs that are brought in and are taking up, arms and having paramilitary operations on our own soil in places like Aurora, Colorado. All of this is a product of the staggering continued fuck-ups of the foreign policies of the Democrats. And that's why Democrats historically suck at foreign policy. And, that's what they do. But let's not forget, and I'm going to talk about this on another show. I'm not going to do it tonight. But I want to talk about another show. I want to think about it and get my thoughts down. And let's all reflect and recall back to that statement by Barack Hussein Obama that he called for changing the demographics of the United States forever. And you got to remember what I've said here on the show before is very simple: borders, culture, language. A country without no borders at all is no country at all. And a culture, we have our own American culture. And specifically, and this is, again, I'm giving you guys a tee up here on a future show, is, look at Afghanistan in the late 60s, early 70s. It was Mustangs and miniskirts. Now look at the fucking place. And that's precisely what Barack Hussein Obama, who I believe has never left Washington, D.C., wants to bring into this country now. And we're in peril. All the successes and everything that we had accomplished, in the 44 years of fighting the Cold War and ending it with Ronald Reagan saying, Gorbachev, tear down that wall. And you know what? Look at where we came from that day in 1989 to today. And you can trace all of the blundering fuck-ups and failures, back to the Democrats. And you can follow that bouncing ball. And this is why elections matter. And this is why we can't lose sight of what we're trying to preserve here. We're not just trying to preserve the United States of America, which is the greatest country on the planet, but we're also trying to preserve Western culture, Western civilization, because that matters. That does matter. And elections have consequences, folks, and we need to make sure that we preserve that. So get out there and vote, and we'll see you all on November 5th. And don't give up. Fight, fight, fight. We're 14 days away. We're 2 weeks away from ushering these turds out of the fucking White House. So let's not forget that the blunderings of the Democrats and their foreign policy fuck-ups have caused the dismay and the anguish and the heartache and all those beautiful Americans that gave up their lives, soldiers in the United States military that are now laying in places like Arlington and private cemeteries across the United States because of the warmongering that was mostly propagated, if not completely propagated, by the Democrats. And I'll end it with the way I said it just a minute ago. The United States and the West now face the greatest threat to post-war world order since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And you've got the Democrats to thank for that. So, but hey, don't forget to, that's it for tonight, guys. That's all I got. I'm kind of ran out of gas here, and I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Thanks for being with me. Happy Tuesday. And please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell button to continue being part of the Lefty G experience. Thanks, guys. Remember, peace through strength. Love you.